Section 1. The tempting beginning. It started on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that feels slow and heavy, where even the ticking clock seems bored. I was sitting in my small living room, phone in hand, scrolling aimlessly when his message popped up. "Hey, you seem quiet today. Everything okay?" It was such a simple sentence, but I read it twice. My heart gave that small, unexpected flutter, the kind that doesn't happen when you've been with someone for years. My partner, Daniel, was away again for work. He had been traveling constantly for months, and even when he was home, his mind was elsewhere, on projects, meetings, and deadlines. I had stopped trying to fight for his attention. But this other man, Alex, he listened. He noticed. We'd met months ago through mutual friends. First it was harmless, casual chats, little jokes. But lately his attention felt different, focused, intentional. And something inside me, something I had tried to bury, responded to it. That day he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I hesitated. I told myself it was just a friendly meetup, nothing wrong with that. But deep down I already knew it was more. At the cafe, sunlight streamed through the window, catching the edges of his hair. His eyes lingered on mine longer than they should have. We talked about work, about music, about the things that made us feel alive. Every word from him seemed to pull me closer, even though I was trying so hard to stay grounded. I laughed more than I had in months. And when I told him about the fights Daniel and I had been having, Alex leaned forward, his voice low. "You deserve to be heard, you know. To be seen." The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to say that out loud. When we left the cafe, he walked me to my car. We stood there for a moment, the air between us charged with something unspoken. My chest felt tight, a mix of guilt and anticipation. I told myself to step back, to keep my distance. But instead, I found myself smiling at him in a way I hadn't smiled at Daniel in a long time. That night, lying in bed alone, I couldn't stop replaying the day in my mind. The warmth in Alex's voice, the way he listened, the subtle way his hand brushed mine when he handed me my coffee. It was just coffee, I told myself. Just a friendly conversation. But deep down I knew the truth. This was the beginning of something dangerous. Something I wasn't sure I could stop. Section 2. The temptation grows. After that coffee, it was impossible to go back to pretending Alex was just a friend. Our conversations became longer, more personal. What started as casual check-ins turned into late-night chats, the kind where the world feels quiet and private, like it exists just for the two of us. Daniel was still gone most nights. He would call when he remembered, but the conversations felt mechanical. "How was your day?" "Fine." "Okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow." We were living parallel lives, and neither of us seemed willing to bridge the gap. Alex filled that space. He asked questions no one had asked me in years. He remembered the small things I told him, the way I liked my tea, the music I listened to when I was sad, the places I dreamed of visiting. He made me feel important again. One evening we met at a quiet park. I told myself it was just to talk, just to enjoy the summer air. But when he arrived, my heart reacted before my brain could intervene. He sat beside me on a bench, our knees almost touching. We talked for hours. About life. About love. About how sometimes the people we care about the most can make us feel the loneliest. When I mentioned Daniel again, Alex's expression softened. "You've been carrying too much alone," he said quietly. His hand brushed against mine, just a graze, but it was enough to make my breath catch. I didn't pull away. The air between us grew heavier with every passing second. I knew I should have said something, created space, reminded us both of the line we shouldn't cross. But instead, I let the silence linger, my fingers curling slightly toward his. Before I knew it, he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think about you more than I should." Those words. They slipped under my skin, settling deep inside me. I whispered back, "Me too." The moment hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It was slow, deliberate, The kind of kiss that feels like a secret you'll never be able to forget. My body responded instinctively, leaning in, even as my mind screamed that this was wrong. When we finally pulled apart, I couldn't meet his eyes. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, though his voice didn't sound sorry at all. "I should go," I managed to reply, but I didn't move. That night, lying awake in the dark, guilt tangled with desire, I kept replaying the moment. His lips, his voice, the way it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I told myself I could stop this, that it didn't have to go any further. But deep down, I knew I had already crossed the line. Section 3. The act of infidelity. The days after that kiss were a blur of denial and longing. I told myself to keep my distance, to let things cool down, but Alex's presence kept pulling me back. Every message from him felt like a magnet I couldn't resist. One rainy evening he texted me, "I'm nearby. Can I come over?" I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. I should have said no. I should have protected what little boundary was left. But instead I typed back, "Okay." When I opened the door, the cool scent of rain followed him inside. He looked at me the way someone does when they've been holding back for too long. We sat on the couch, talking at first, the conversation shaky and interrupted by nervous glances. I tried to act casual, but my body betrayed me, leaning closer, reacting to every subtle touch. Then, in a moment that felt both inevitable and terrifying, his hand found mine. I pulled away slightly, my voice unsteady. Don't do fast," I whispered, as if slowing it down would somehow make it less wrong. But the truth was, I didn't really want him to stop. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my neck, his breath warm. My heart raced, my chest tightening as the last pieces of my resistance fell away. Every touch sent a shiver through me, drowning out the guilt with raw, overpowering desire. I told myself this was just a moment, just one lapse in judgment. But when his hands pulled me closer and our bodies pressed together, I knew we were stepping into something that couldn't be undone. It happened slowly at first, a careful exploration, each movement deliberate, as if we were memorizing the details. Then the pace quickened, passion overtaking caution. My whispers turned into gasps, a tangled mix of protest and surrender. When it was over, we stayed there in silence. The air felt heavy, filled with the weight of what we'd done. Alex reached for my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles over my skin. "I don't regret this," he said softly. I couldn't speak. My thoughts were too loud. The image of Daniel's face, the sound of my own voice telling myself over and over that I would never let this happen. But it had happened. When Alex finally left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my breath uneven. I felt both full and empty, full from the intensity of what we'd shared, and empty from knowing it came at the cost of my integrity. That night sleep never came. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the echoes of his touch and the sharp sting of guilt. I had crossed the line completely. There was no pretending anymore. Section 4. The consequences and realization. The morning after felt like walking through a fog. I moved through the house mechanically, making coffee, staring out the window, trying to convince myself that it was just a moment, that it didn't mean anything. But the truth clung to me like the scent of rain still lingering on my skin from the night before. Daniel called that afternoon. His voice was the same, calm, distracted. "I'll be home next week," he said, as if that was supposed to feel like good news. I murmured a reply, my throat dry, my mind replaying every second of what happened with Alex. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. My chest felt heavy, the weight of the secret pressing down on me. The next time I saw Alex, the air between us was different. The passion from that night was still there, but it was tangled with something darker, a knowing that we'd crossed a threshold we couldn't uncross. He smiled at me the way he always had, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew I was unraveling. "We don't have to feel guilty," he said, brushing my hand with his. "But we did." I did. Daniel came home days later. The moment I saw him standing in the doorway with his suitcase, something inside me twisted. I wanted to run into his arms like I used to, but instead I hesitated. I saw him, and behind him, I saw the shadow of what I had done. Our conversations felt strained. He noticed it too. "Is something wrong?" he asked one night, his voice softer than I expected. I wanted to tell him everything, to unburden myself, to let the truth pour out. But the words stayed trapped in my throat. I just shook my head. Days turned into weeks, but the guilt never eased. It seeped into everything. The way I looked at Daniel, the way I avoided mirrors, the way I flinched whenever Alex's name appeared on my phone. I started questioning myself. Was this what I really wanted? Did I do it because I loved Alex, or because I was trying to fill a hole Daniel had left? And the most painful question of all, if I had to do it again, would I? One night, alone in bed, I finally faced the truth. Alex didn't fix me. He didn't save me. What happened between us was a rush, a distraction, a fire that burned bright but left ashes in its wake. I thought I was escaping loneliness, but I had only traded it for a different kind, the loneliness of carrying a secret that could destroy everything. The story doesn't end with a clean break or a happy ending. It ends with me lying awake, listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me, wondering how I became someone I swore I'd never be. And knowing deep down that some lines once crossed can never be undone.